Well, greetings and welcome to this video training tutorial on using Excel to create a new variable such as an average score, or to create a new variable based on adding or summing up a set of values. And for the purpose of this training tutorial, we are going to work with data or survey data that has been collected on a group of 100 individuals based off a self-report survey on a scale of 1 to 5, or strongly disagree to strongly agree. And in this case, we have data collected on students' ID, their status, perhaps if they're in a program or not, sex with values 1 of 2, language, another measure of language, race, and then their responses to a total of 15 items, whereas the first 7 items go to one subscale and the remaining 8 items go to another subscale. And so what particularly this data set represents is why it's important to have a variable coding sheet to know what values are represented or what variables represent each column, but then also what the values within the actual database represent. And one of the first things you might want to do here is just to kind of help with the formatting and your ability to manipulate and work with the data is to format it into a table, which can be done by highlighting all the columns, clicking format as a table. Here's the data, my table's headers. And what you can see this does automatically is it turns your headings into filters that you can do where you can arrange your data according to like sex or language. You can pick out only to work with, perhaps if females are labeled 1 is to only pull out the female data, or if males are labeled 2 is to pull out the information corresponding to only males. And so this is just one of the features of putting your data into a table. But what we are focusing on in this module is how do you create an overall score to represent study participants standing on a set of items that they may have responded to, measures of like teacher self-efficacy, comfort with using specific instructional strategies, or perhaps even students' perceptions of school safety. And so in this case, we have individuals' responses across 15 items. And what we want to do is create an overall total composite score to represent each person standing on the overall measure. And so what we want to do then is create perhaps one overall score to represent their standing here, perhaps on beliefs towards their capacity for demonstrating specific literacy skills. And so the first things we're going to do is we're going to create a new variable, because we have individuals' responses across the 15 items, but we now need to create an overall score to represent how they answered across all 15 items. And so we can do this by creating a new variable called total. May do SC for total score. You can see once you do that, it automatically converts it to a formatted table heading. And so with that, now we need to create the new score. So we can indicate this by clicking on the first cell for the first person. And again, we're going to be doing a formula. We're creating an average or mean score. So these people's scores, these respondent scores, are going to fall on a scale of 1 to 5. It's going to be an average. And so here for our functions argument, whenever we're doing formulas, we have to indicate the cells within the range that we want to use to create this overall composite score. And so if we just click on the number, and all we're going to do is highlight all the items that we want to include in this total score. And here we do for everything from G2, cell G2, all the way up through U2, because these are the responses across all 15 items. We can click that. And once we do that, we hit OK. And here we have the average score of 2 here. This is fine, I'm just checking to kind of see what it did for us. And what you can see is what it did do is it calculated for the entire column. And one thing we can do is highlight these, and if we want to put them on, whoops. One of the things it did do is it did it for a whole bunch of extra columns, which we don't need. But I'm just going to put it on as a number with 2 decimal places, which we highlight the cells. For the category, we put number and then 2 decimal places. But something you see that it did also is it did it for a whole bunch of extra cells. And this was because this data set was originally much, much larger. And so all I'm going to do is just go and highlight those and delete them so we don't have to kind of look at this extra information here when we might want to be generating some graphs or some other pieces of information. Or just to clear the content. So now we have average scores then for each individual. They're going to fall in a range from 1 to 5 for each person here. And so now you see each person has his or her own, all the way up through 100 has his or her own score, which represents how they've scored across the set of items. Typically on surveys, we do want to calculate the average or mean score across survey items. On a measure of academic achievement, on the other hand, where the values might be represented as 0 for incorrect, 1 is correct, in that case you might just want to do a sum. And you just do the same process by labeling the column, you know, maybe a raw score. And then we just want to do, instead of doing an average, we just do equal. And we want to do a sum. And likewise, we're just going to add up all the values. In this case, you can see Excel by default does it for the whole column. So now you just have, instead of the mean score between 1 and 5, you have a total sum score. But typically within surveys, we do, you know, you're going to see here all these are going to be 0. We can just delete those off. But typically for surveys, though, we do use average scores, which you might see are common in your empirical articles you're reading, whereas on academic achievement measures where you just have correct or incorrect, those are typically raw scores. We just add up the values. And so once we have the raw scores, then it's just a matter of understanding the characteristics of the data. We can estimate the average scores for males and females, different language groups, as well as different race ethnic groups, just by, you know, selecting out those who we want to look at the information for. In this case, if it's all people with a sex variable labeled 1, maybe that's males and females. And for the mean score, maybe for males, we want to figure out what's their average score. Whoops. We want to do, find out what their average score is. So we just do that by clicking on the average, the values in the V column. Males had an overall average score of 2.1. Whereas then for females, maybe we want to find out. Sometimes when you do this, you gotta make sure Excel's not going to have that stuff disappear on you, so we just want to pick out those for 2. And so for females then, equals, we want to do the average. And for the total score, Please highlight that column. And so here we can look at and inspect to see, you know, what's the average overall score differences between males and females on this self-reported measure. And so once we have the item level data already entered into Excel, how each person responded to each item on a scale of 1 to 5, we can go ahead and create a new score that represents how they respond across that set of items. In this case, for surveys or questionnaires, we typically use average or means. And then by just manipulating the data set, the database, we can then go and estimate overall total scores for the different demographic subgroups represented within the data set. And so then we can make some judgments about how males and females, different race, ethnic groups, or language groups respond across a set of items to make decisions about their self-beliefs, attitudes, or perceptions towards some set of items that we were inquiring relevant to our research question. So with this concludes our video tutorial module on creating scores within Excel. Thank you.